Hello my dear students, welcome to Teacher at Home. Today class we are going to learn the second chapter, that is a constitutional design. Overview. We noted in the previous chapter that in a democracy the rulers are not free to do what they like. There are certain basic rules that the citizens and the government have to follow. All such rules together are called constitution. As the supreme law of the country, the constitution determines the rights of citizens, the powers of the government, and how the government should function. In this chapter, we ask some basic questions about the constitutional design of the democracy. Why do we need a constitution? How are the constitution drawn up? Who designs them and in what way? What are the values of the shapes the constitution in democratic states? Once a constitution is accepted, can we make changes later as required by the changing conditions? One recent instance of designing constitution for a democratic state is that of South Africa. We begin this chapter by looking at what happened there and how the South Africans went about this task of designing their constitution. Then we turn to how the Indian constitution was made, what its fundamental values are, how it provides a good framework for the conduct of citizens' life and that of the government. Democratic constitution in South Africa. I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the deal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. This was Nelson Mandela being tried to treason by the white South African government. He and seven other leaders were sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964 for daring to oppose the apartheid regime in this country. He spent the next 28 years in South Africa's most dreaded prison, that is Robben Island. Native Indians and coloreds. If you enter these premises at night, you will be listed as missing. Armed guards shoot on sight. Savage dogs devour the corpse. You have been warned. That is a warning signal. Struggle against apartheid. Apartheid was the name of the system of racial discrimination unique to South Africa. The white Europeans imposed this system on South Africa. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the trading companies from Europe occupied it with arms and force in the way they occupied India. But unlike India, a large number of whites have settled in South Africa and became the local rulers. The system of apartheid divided the people and labeled them on the basis of their skin color. The native people of South Africa are black in color. They made up of about three-fourths of the population and were called blacks. Beside these two groups, there were people of mixed races who were called colored and people who migrated from India. The white rulers treated all non-whites as inferiors. The non-whites did not have voting rights. The apartheid system was particularly oppressive for the blacks. They were forbidden from living in white areas. They could work in white areas only if they had a permit. Trains, buses, taxis, hotels, hospitals, schools and colleges, libraries, cinema halls, theaters, beaches, swimming pools, public toilets were all separate for the whites and blacks. This was called segregation. They could not even visit the churches where the whites worshipped. Blacks could not form associations or protest against the terrible treatment. Since 1950, the blacks, colored, and Indians fought against the apartheid health system. They launched protest marches and strikes. The African National Congress was the umbrella organization that held the struggle against the policies of segregation. This included many workers, unions, and the Communist Party. Many sensitive whites also joined the ANC to oppose apartheid and played a leading role in this struggle. Several countries denounced apartheid as unjust and racist, but the white racist government continued to rule by detaining, torturing, and killing thousands of black and white colored people. Towards a new constitution, as protests and struggles against apartheid had increased, The government released that they could no longer keep the blacks under their rule through the repression. The white regime changed its policies. Discriminatory laws were repealed, ban on political parties, and restrictions on the media were lifted. After 28 years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela walked out of the jail as a free man. Finally, at the midnight of 26 April 1994, the new national flag of the Republic of South Africa was unfurled, marking the newborn democracy in the world. The apartheid government came to an end, paving way for the formation of a multiracial government. How did this come about? Let us hear Mandela, the first president of the South Africa, on the extraordinary transition. Historical enemies succeeded in negotiating a peaceful transition from apartheid to democracy exactly because we were prepared to accept the inherent capacity of goodness in the other. My wish is that South Africans never give up the belief in godness, that they cherish that faith in human beings is a cornerstone of our democracy. After the emergence of a new democratic South Africa, black leaders appealed to fellow blacks to forgive the whites to the atrocities they had committed while in power. They said, "Let us build a new South Africa based on equality of all races and men and women, on democratic values, social justice, and human rights." The party that ruled through oppression and brutal killings and the party that led to the development freedom struggle sat together to draw up a common constitution. After 2 years of discussion and debate, they came out with one of the finest constitutions the world has ever had. This constitution gave to its citizens the most extensive right to available in any country. Together, they decided that, in search for a solution of the problems, nobody should be excluded, no one should be treated as a demon. They agreed that everybody should become part of the solution, whatever they might have done or represented in the past. The preamble to the South African Constitution sums up the spirit. The South African Constitution inspires Democrats all over the world. It stayed denounced by the entire world till 1994 as the most undemocratic one is now seen as a model of democracy. What made this change possible was the determination of the people of South Africa to work together, to transform bitter experiences into the binding glue to the rainbow nation. Speaking on the South African Constitution, Mandela said, "Constitution of South Africa speaks of both the past and the future. On the other hand, it is a solemn pact in which we as South Africans declare to one another that we shall never permit a repetition of our racist, brutal, and repressive past. But it is more than that. It is also a charter for the transformations of our country into one which is truly shared by all its people, a country which is in the fullest sense belongs to all of us, black and white, women and men." The image captures the spirit of South Africa today. Some South Africans call themselves as Rainbow Nation. Okay, why do we need a constitution? The South African example is a good way to understand why we need a constitution and what do constitution do. Oppressor and oppressed in the new democracy were planning to live together as equals. It was not going to be easy for them to trust each other. They had their fears. They wanted to safeguard their interests. The black majority was keen to ensure that the democratic principle of majority rule was not compromised. They wanted substantial social and economic rights. The white minority was keen to protect its privileges and property. After long negotiations, both parties agreed to a compromise. The whites agreed to the principle of majority rule and that of one person to vote. They also agreed to accept some basic right to the proper for the poor and the workers. The blacks agreed that majority rule would not be absolute. They agreed that the majority would not take away the property of the white minority. This compromise was not easy. How was this compromise going to be implemented? Even if they were managed to trust each other, what was the guarantee that the trust will not be broken in future? Only way to build and maintain trust in such a situation is to write down some rules of the game that everyone should abide by. These rules lay down how the rulers are to be chosen in future. The rules also determine what the elected governments are empowered to do and what they cannot do. Finally, these rules decide the rights of the citizen. These rules will work only if the Winter cannot change them very easily. This is what South Africans did. They agreed on some basic rules. They also agreed uh, that these rules will be supreme, that no government will be able to ignore this. This sets of basic rules is called a constitution. Constitution making is not unique to South Africa. Every country, every country that is here, every country has its diverse groups of people. The relationship may not have been as bad as the between the whites and the blacks in South Africa. But all over the world, people have differences of opinion and interest. Whether democratic or not, most countries in the world need to have these basic rules. This applies not just to government. Any association need to have its constitution. It could be a club in your area, a corporation, society, or a political party. They all need a constitution. Thus, the constitution of a country is a set of written rules that are accepted by all people living together in a country. Constitution is the supreme law that determines the relationship among people living in a territory and also the relationship between the people and government. A constitution does many things. First, it generates a degree to trust and coordination that is necessary for different kind of people to live together. Second, it specifies how the government will be constituted, who will have the power to take which decisions. Third, it lays down limits on the powers of the government and tells us what the rights of the citizens are. And fourth, it expresses the aspirations of the people about creating a good society. All countries that have constitutions are not necessarily democratic, but all countries that are democratic will have constitution. After the War of Independence against Great Britain, Americans have themselves a constitution. After the revolution, the French people approved democratic constitution. Since then, it has become a practice in all democrats to have a written constitution. Making of Indian Constitution. Like South Africa, Indian constitutions was also drawn up under very difficult circumstances. The making of the constitution for a huge and diverse country like India was not an easy affair. At that time, the people of India were emerging from the status of subjects to that of citizens. The country was born through a partition on the basis of religious differences. This was a traumatic experience for the people of India and Pakistan. At least 10 lakh people were killed on both sides of the border of the partition related violence. There was another problem. The British had left to the rules of the princely states to decide whether they wanted to merge with India or with Pakistan or to remain independent. The merger of this princely state was a difficult and uncertain task. When the constitution was being written, the future of the country did not look as secure as it does today. The markers of the constitution had anxieties about the present and future of the country. Path of constitution. Despite all these difficulties, there was one big advantage of the makers of the Indian constitution, unlike South Africa. They did not have to create a census about what a democratic India should look like. Much of this consensus had evolved during the freedom of struggle. Our national movement was not merely a struggle against the foreign rule. It was also a struggle to regenerate our country and to transform our society and politics. There were sharp differences of opinion within the freedom struggle about the path India should take after independence. Such differences even exist today, yet some basic ideas have come to be accepted by almost everyone. As far back as in 1928, Motilal Nehru and 8 other Congress leaders drafted a constitution for India. In 1931, the resolution for the Karachi sessions of the Indian National Congress dwelt on how independent India's constitution should look like. Both these documents were committed to the inclusion of universal adult franchise, right to freedom and equality, and to protecting the rights of minorities in the Constitution of Independent India. Thus, some basic values were accepted by all leaders much before the Constitution Assembly meet to deliberate on the Constitution. The familiarity with the political institutions of colonial rule also helped them develop an agreement over the institutional design. The British rule had given voting rights only to a few. On the basis of the British had introduced very weak legislatures, elections were held in 1930 7 to provincial legislatures and ministries all over British India. All over British India. These were not fully democratic governments, but the experience gained by Indians in the working of the legislative institutions proved to be very useful for the country in setting up its own institutions and working in them. That is why the Indian Constitution adopted many institutional details and procedures from colonial laws like the Government of India Act 1935. Years of thinking and deliberation on the framework of the Constitution had another benefit. All leaders gained confidence to learn from other countries, but on our own terms. Many of our leaders were inspired by the ideals of French Revolution, a practice of parliamentary democracy in British and the Bill of Rights in the US. The socialist revolution in Russia had inspired many Indians to think of shaping a system based on social and economic equality. Yet they were not simply imitating what others have done. At each step, they were questioning whether these things suited for country. All these factors contributed to the making of the Constitution. The Constituent Assembly, who then were the makers of the Indian institution, who will find here very brief sketch of some of the leaders who played an important role in making the Constitution. The drafting of the document called the Constitution was done by an assembly of elected representatives called the Constituent Assembly. Elections to the Constituent Assembly were held in July 1946. Its first meeting was held in December 1946. Soon after, the country was divided into India and Pakistan. The Constituent Assembly was also divided into Constituent Assembly of India and that of Pakistan. Constituent Assembly that wrote the Indian Constitution had 299 members. Assembly adopted the Constitution on 26 November 1949, but it came into effect on 26 January 1950. To mark this day, we celebrate January 26 as Republic Day every year. Why should we accept the Constitution made by this Assembly more than 6 decades ago? We have already noted one reason above. The Constitution does not reflect the views of its members alone. It expresses a broad consensus of its time. Many countries of the world have had to rewrite their constitution afresh because the basic rules were not acceptable to all major social group of political parties. In some other countries, the constitution exists as a mere piece of paper. No one actually follows it. Experience of our constitution is difficult. Over the last half of the century, several groups have questioned some provisions of the constitution. But no charged social group or political party has ever questioned the legitimacy of the constitution itself. This is an unusual achievement for any constitution. The second reason for accepting the constitution is that the Constituent Assembly represented the people of India. There was no universal adult franchisee at that time, so the Constituent Assembly could not have been chosen directly by all people of India. It was elected mainly by the members of the existing provincial legislatures that we mentioned above. This ensured a fair geographical share of the members from all the regions of the country. The assembly was dominated by the Indian National Congress, the party that led India's freedom struggle. But the Congress itself included a variety of political groups and opinions. Assembly had many members who did not agree with the Congress. In social terms too, Assembly represented members from different languages, groups, castes, classes, religions, and occupations. Even if the Constituent Assembly was elected by universal adult franchisee, its composition would not have been very different. Finally, the manner in which Constituent Assembly worked gives a sanctity to the Constitution. The Constituent Assembly worked in a systematic, open, and consensual manner. First, some basic principles were decided and agreed upon. Then a drafting committee chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar prepared a draft constitution for discussion. Several rounds of thorough discussion took place on the draft constitution, clause by clause. More than 2,000 amendments were considered. The members deliberated for 114 days spread over 3 years. Every document presented and every word spoken in the Constituent Assembly has been recorded and preserved. These are called Constituent Assembly debates. When printed, these debates are 12 bulky volumes. These debates provide the nationally behind every provisions of the Constitution. These are used to interpret the meaning of the Constitution. Guiding values of the Indian Constitution. In this book, we shall study the exact provisions of the Constitution on different subjects. At this stage, let us begin by understanding the overall philosophy of what our Constitution is all about. We can do this in two ways. We can understand it by reading the views of some of our major leaders on our Constitution. But it is equally important to read what the Constitution says about it on philosophy. This is what the preamble of the Constitution does. Let us turn to this one by one. The dream and the promise. Some of you have been noticed a name missing from the sketches of the makers of the Constitution, Mahatma Gandhi. He was not a member of the Constituent Assembly. Yet, there were many members who followed this vision. Years ago, writing in his magazine, Young India, in 1931, he had spelled out what he wanted the Constitution to do. I shall strive of a constitution which will release India from all thraldom and patronage. I shall work for an India in which the poorest shall feel that is their country in whose making they have an effective voice, an India in which there shall be high class and low class of people, an India in which all communities shall live in perfect harmony. Can be no room in such an India for the curse of untouchability or the curse of the intoxicating drinks and drugs. Women will enjoy the same right at men. I shall be satisfied with nothing else. This dream of an India that has eliminated inequality was shared by Dr. Ambedkar, who played a key role in the making of the Constitution but had a different understanding of how inequalities could be removed. He often bitterly criticized Mahatma Gandhi and his vision. In the concluding speech of the Constituent Assembly, he stated the anxiety very clearly. On the 26th January 1950, we are going to enter a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. Finally, let us turn to Jawaharlal Nehru, giving his famous speech to the Constituent Assembly at the stroke of midnight on 15th August 1947. Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge not wholly on the full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation long suppressed find utterance. It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the pledge of dedication of the service of India and her people and to the still larger cause of humanity. Freedom and power bring responsibility. Responsibility rests upon this assembly, a sovereign body representing the sovereign people of India. Before the birth of freedom, we have endured all the pains of labor, and our hearts are heavy with the memory of this sorrow. Some of these pains continue even now. Nevertheless, the past is over, and it is the future that beckons to us now. That future is not one of the case of resting, but of incessant striving so that we may fulfill the pledges we have so often taken and the ones we shall take today. The service of India means the service of the millions who suffer. It means the ending of poverty, ignorance, and disease and inequality of opportunity. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but as long as there are cures and suffering, so long our work will not be over. Philosophy of the Constitution. Values that inspired and guided the freedom struggle and were in turn nurtured by it, formed the foundation of India's democracy. These values are embedded in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. The guide all the articles of the Indian Constitution. The Constitution begins with a short statement of its basic values. This is called the preamble to the Constitution. Taking inspiration from American model, most countries in the contemporary world have chosen to begin their constitution with a preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfares, and secure the blessings of liberty of ourselves and our posterity, so ordain and establish this, or in the Constitution of the British States of America. Let us read the preamble of a constitution very carefully and understanding the meaning of each word. The preamble of the constitution reads like a poem of democracy on democracy. It contains a philosophy on which the entire constitution has been built, provides a standard to examine and evaluate any law and action of the government to find out whether it is good or bad. It is the soul of the Indian constitution. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into sovereign, secular, socialist, democratic republic, and to ensure secure all citizens, justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. We, the people of India, the Constitution has been drawn up and enacted by the people through their representatives and not handed down to them by a king or any outside powers. Sovereign. People have supreme right to make decisions on internal as well as external matters. No external power was can dictate the government of India. Socialist. Wealth is generated socially and should be shared equally by society. Government should regulate the ownership of land and industry to reduce social economic inequalities. Secular. Citizens have complete freedom to follow any religion, but there is no official religion. Government treats all religious beliefs and practices with equal respect. Democratic, a form of government where people enjoy equal political rights, elect their rulers, and hold them accountable. The government is running according to some basic rules. Republic, the head of the state is an elected person and not a hereditary position. Justice, citizen cannot be discriminated on the grounds of caste, religion, and gender. Social inequalities had to be reduced. Government should work for the welfare of all, especially of the disadvantaged groups. Liberty. There are no unreasonable restrictions on the citizen in what they think, how they wish to express their thoughts, and the way they wish to follow up their thought in action. Equality. All are equal before the law. The traditional social inequalities have to be ended. The government should ensure equal opportunity for all. Fraternity. All of us should behave as if we are members of the same family. No one should treat a fellow citizen as inferior. Institutional design. A constitution is not merely a statement of values and philosophy. As we noted above, the constitution is mainly about embodying these values into institutional arrangements. Much of the document called Constitution of India is about this arrangement. It is a very long and detailed document. Therefore, it needs to be amended quite regularly to keep it updated. Those who crafted the Indian Constitution felt that it has to be in accordance with the people's aspirations and changes in society. They did not see it as scared, static, and unalterable law. So they made provisions to incorporate changes from time to time. These changes are called constitutional amendments. Constitution describes the institutional arrangements in a very legal language. If you read the Constitution for the first time, it can be quite difficult to understand. At the basic institutional design, it is not very difficult to understand. Like any constitution, the Indian Constitution lays down a procedure for choosing persons to govern the country. It defines who will have how much power to take which decisions, and it put limits to what the government can do by providing some right to the citizen that cannot be violated. The remaining three chapters in this book are about these three aspects of the working of Indian Constitution. We shall look at some key constitutional provisions in each chapter and understand how they work in democratic politics. But this textbook will not cover all the salient features of the institutional design in the Indian Constitution. Some other aspects will be recovered in your textbooks next year. So these are the certain words, meanings of certain words given. That is, apartheid, the official party of racial separation and ill treatment of blacks, followed by the government of South Africa between 1948 and 1989. Clause a distinct section of the document. Constituent Assembly, an assembly of people's representatives that write a constitution for a country. Constitution, supreme law of a country, containing fundamental rules governing the politics and society in a country. Constitutional amendment, a change in the constitution made by the supreme legislative body in a country. Draft, a preliminary version of a legal document. Philosophy, the most fundamental principles underlying one's thoughts and actions. Preamble, an introductory statement in a constitution which states the reasons and guiding values of the constitution. Treason, the offense of attempting to overthrow the government of the state to which the offender owes allegiance. Tryst, a meeting or meeting place that has been agreed upon. And here are some questions given. Exercise. Okay, so that's all about this chapter. If you're interested, please do like, share and subscribe my channel. Okay, thank you.